Hey you guys, it's Dani. Today we are starting the deep dive into the Mystic Masters Tarot. So, even if you don't have the Mystic Masters, I feel like you could still get something out of it. If not, that's okay too. We'll see you next video. What this is basically, or what I hope this basically will do, is kind of act as almost like a video guidebook. There is a PDF guidebook that comes with the deck. It is on this card. It will take you to the link to download the PDF version of the Mystic Masters if you have it. But I kind of wanted to expand on that, right? I didn't go extensively into writing a guidebook. That's not super my forte, right? So like, I'm a talker. I can talk through this more so than I can write it, because I feel like sometimes it's more of a feeling and it's easier to describe. So this is going to be kind of what that is. The one thing that I want to make abundantly clear throughout this whole process of this deep dive is that I made this deck to be intuitive. Yes, it follows an RWS system, and I'm going to be comparing each card side by side. We're going to be talking about the RWS and Mystic Masters side by side, each and every card, right? But as a whole, I'm an intuitive reader. I understand that not everybody is, that some people are very strict on their systems, and that's okay, because there's a little bit of that in here too. But from there, what do you feel? What do you see? Right? This is an intuitive deck, and that's kind of where it based out of. So that's kind of what I want to expand upon. The similarities, the differences, and then of course, what is your added layer? What do you see that maybe I didn't talk about? You know, what are your interpretations? What does it feel like to you? I want to hear all these things because everything is valid, right? That's what art is about. Just because these are going to be my interpretations does not mean that they have to be yours, right? That's the beauty of tarot. That's the beauty of intuitive reading. I hope that you take this and run with it. That's a long way of saying, let's dive into this, right? Let's really go in depth and see what we can see with this Mystic Masters, and maybe some hidden gems and stories along the way. So let's get started. I have my journal. Of course, I took a nod from Dawn Michelle at Boho Tarot, and I completely ripped up an old bullet journal that I had and recovered it with some of the paper that I used while doing Mystic Masters. And so I just created my own little notebook. So you're going to see this come in and out of the frame, I'm sure. It has what is in the guidebook, as well as some of the main things that were important to me when choosing, a little bit of my stories and stuff. And of course, it's going to have spaces for added interpretations. Thanks to you guys, right? Yes. Okay. So let's start with the Fool. And just to let you guys know, I'm not going to be reading the guidebook throughout this process. I'm going to just be adding to the interpretation and background of the cards. Let's start with the Fool. Like I said, we have this depiction of Adonis. So this is by Jacob Matham. Now, fair warning, I'm not a linguist, if we haven't noticed that yet. So there are some things, some names are, maybe some things as well, that I don't pronounce correctly. I'm doing my best. I'm trying. I pre-apologize for that. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the picture first. So with this image, I chose Adonis, not only because it's the youth that I wanted to see, and the fact that we have the dogs, right? So these correspondences, the thing that I was looking for is like, do I see the Fool? Do I see these archetypes there? And Adonis really did that for me, even on a base level. We have a youth, very vulnerable, obviously. We have a spear here versus the, I'm not even going to pretend to know what this is called. His little stick with his bag on the end, right? And then the dogs here. Now, there's also what seems to be a cliff. It kind of ends here, so we can't tell what's in front of him. So it was very much just image alone spoke to me of the Fool. But then we have the added element of it being Adonis, which also, to me, really has ties with that Fool energy. For you who don't know the story, for any of you who don't know the story, Adonis is kind of part of both worlds because he spends time with Aphrodite in the heavens, if you will, and then he also spends time with Persephone in the underworld. So it's like he's got those vibes of rebirth in the same way that Persephone does, right? She is in the underworld and then comes out into the springtime, right? And begins the spring. Whereas like Adonis is kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. In this case, he is now out in this world, so he is renewed and reborn to this world. So I just thought that that also kind of played into the idea of the Fool, and his story in general kind of has those same kind of Fool aspects. If you want to go a little deeper on Adonis, I would definitely recommend reading his myth. Let's talk about some more kind of similarities in the imagery. We're facing the opposite way, right? But still a very much a nod to even the position that they're in. But I do like the idea of, you know, I always think that the Fool, what he has in this little sack is kind of what he took from him from the spirit world, right? As he walks in, there are some kind of base instincts and base knowledges, like the universe has his back, so to speak. And the way that I thought about it in this Fool is that pointing up, right? He has these dogs tethered, which makes me feel like he's got that guidance from the dogs, you know? He has that extra companionship. He has that kind of security that he is not alone. But that pointing up also makes me think of the fact that, you know, he knows that there is more out there. He knows that there is a higher being kind of watching and guiding as best as they can. It's just that kind of acknowledgement of the universe itself that I thought was a really potent imagery when it came to the Fool. So lastly, let's just talk about the coloration. So I do often, but not always, take inspiration from the RWS in my coloration, and the Fool was one of them. Because his outfit here, his ensemble, is a lot of green, I wanted to have my Fool's cape green, and then with the background I added yellow up at the top into blue here at the bottom. Though it's mostly yellow with a little blue, I flip-flopped that and had a little yellow with mostly blue. A nod to the sun being out, but also to that clear blue sky. So that's the Fool. Now let's talk about the Magician. So first and foremost, this is allegory of impermanence, or vanity of vanities. All is vanity. There's a few different long titles here. But this is by Jan Shinredam. Again, I'm no linguist. So I chose a female magician. On purpose? No. But when I saw her, I just knew she was perfect. Because when I immediately laid eyes on this picture, I thought magician. There are a few key points to that. Okay, we do have Mercury here. But on her table, there is a wand. There is a crown. There are vessels here. There's like almost like I guess it's a knife or some sort of other instrument on her table where I thought swords. It's like almost everything was represented here, right? And then she has a slight upward turn to her finger, which made me think of as above, then her toe pointing downward as below. So for me, it was a distinct thing where I could still see those images, right? There is also something brewing in the vessel that she has here, which makes me think immediately of alchemist, right? She is creating her own world. And that really makes me think of the magical arts. So I did add the lamnescate up here at the top, just as on our regular magician. Other than that, I didn't take much. As far as coloration goes, there is a lot of gold, but again, I was thinking alchemy, right? Versus this bright yellow that they normally have. So as far as the magician goes, these are the main things that drew me to this image and creating it. As far as the imagery here, I did want everything to look sort of smoky with this magician. I wanted there to have a sense of magic going on, which really is the reason why I had all this texture up here. There are also 3 little dots where her fingers are to kind of symbolize that magic she is creating. Even with the lift of her finger, she's manifesting things into being. So that is our magician. Up next, let's talk about the High Priestess. I love her so deeply. So deeply. This is Impermanence, or The End, by Albright Durher, and you will notice he's all over this deck. I love his work. He's one of my favorites when it comes to allegory and imagery. It's amazing. So when I saw her, I knew exactly where I wanted her. The High Priestess is a full embodiment to me for her. So let's kind of talk about that. Well, we have, of course, the blue corresponding in her robes here. We have a fruit in her hand, which is an apple, not a pomegranate. However, I feel like the apple still speaks of some inner knowledge, right? It represents that tree of knowledge for me, where it's the wisdom she possesses. So in the same way that she possesses the Torah in her hand here, we have the apple in this hand, which I really loved. And again, the red kind of reminds me of the pomegranate. And of course, we have some Persephone vibes as well, which I always feel like the High Priestess has with the pomegranates and that kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the other realms, which I feel like we can really see here. We have the pillars here, but in this image down at the bottom, we have a skull with almost said a spear, not a spear, a spade. So a shovel on this open space, whether that be the grave or whatever, but it reminded me of that other realm, right? So I consider it like a grave, but she is up above it. And then we have the hourglass, which has a dial on the top. So it made me think immediately of Sands of Time. With that dial on top, it's like she can see the past, present, and the future. She only has to dial it in. She is that walker between realms, between worlds. And I really do feel like she embodies this. We have the moon over here on the side, which corresponds with the High Priestess. I also, if you look here at the top with the textures that I added, these top ones I wanted to kind of represent the idea of water, since the High Priestess and the moon are all kind of connected with the element of water. I just kind of wanted to add that there. So we have some wave textures, and then we have these white dots coming down, which for me, I just kind of wanted to represent rain, kind of that water element coming down, sometimes in an uncontrollable way. So we also have her completely sky-clad, which also makes me think of her as a sorceress, right? Again, just like with our magician, having that nod to that sky-clad magician working their magic, I just feel like her vulnerability and her whole presence is the one of confidence, that she's going out into this world naked and unafraid, right? She's willing to work her magic in whatever means she feels necessary. So I just loved the confidence that she had, which gave me vibes from this High Priestess who looks straight at you, right? She is not afraid to look into the depths of your soul. And I feel like that's how she walks upon the earth. So there we go, the High Priestess. So now let's talk the Empress. This is the image Lust by Jacob Matham. We have on her arm the Venus symbol. And right away, what I noticed about this image was, number one, we have this, what looks to be a full belly, whether that be pregnant or not. It just reminded me of it. There's this little bird on her hand, right? And the way she is presenting herself and walking forward, there seems to be some kind of air of authority. So for our Empress, what I added, I made the three sort of mimic a crown. And if you look all around, there are stars. Kind of a nod to the RWS with the 12 stars around her head. Though there are more, it was about an idea, a concept, more so than a replica, right? So there's not much in tones here. It's all about the vibes of this Empress. I loved the way that she seemed so open, right? In the same way that this Empress does as well. She's not closed off. She's sitting off to the side. She's showing you her whole self. And that's what I really liked about this Empress as well. So she goes out into the world versus allowing the world coming to her. So she's up and about and walking, whereas this Empress is sitting. But I just felt like seeing her up and about and kind of walking on the earth barefoot really spoke to the element earth that the Empress kind of holds there. So one other thing that I thought about when I chose this image was the little bird that she has in her hand. So this bird, to me, represents that nurturing that can have a tendency to go either way, right? She can nurture this bird back to health and allow it to fly away whenever it needs to, or she could nurture this bird to the point of smothering, where she stifles it and won't allow it to leave the nest, or, the proverbial nest. But I really thought that it was a great representation of that nurturing without being an actual child, right? And again, with the open belly and the idea of the breast and the belly being out, it's like it can represent that motherhood, the fertility, and feminine sexuality, which is what I think of when I think of the Empress. It is that female sexuality. So in another little nod, the fact that this was lust kind of had an added layer, but it wasn't the reason that I chose it, right? But you can always think of little things. That's one of those happy accidents, I guess you would say. The fact that this is supposed to be a personification of lust, I also think that fits with our Empress as well. So again, when it comes to colorations or different things like that, I did not represent those things on this card. It was more of the idea of the crown and stars that I pulled from the RWS. So there's the Empress. Let's move on to the Emperor. we have Jupiter by George Pence. That's the image that I chose. And you can see right away the nods to the coloration of this. Of course, we have this fiery orange that kind of represents that background of the RWS. I really wanted that fire to show. And then with this one, unlike Lust, which was a happy accident, this was very intentional because I wanted Jupiter here. And of course, we have Aries symbol up in the corner. But I wanted Jupiter or Zeus in this image because he is the ruler of the gods. He kind of holds that emperor energy in general. And I wanted to make sure that he seemed like a powerful man. This one, again, in the same way that the Empress, I kind of liked the idea of her being up and about versus sitting, letting the world come to her versus kind of going out. That's how I felt with this emperor. Here he is sitting on his throne. He's already accomplished it. I kind of wanted an emperor in the thick of things. Like he is building this legacy. He's got it, but now he's going to protect it moving forward. And that's really the vibes that I wanted. You know, I wanted him to be an active participant, more so than the established kind of sitting back and just kind of doing the word is lost to me, kind of retaining what he's accomplished. I kind of wanted him to be this active figure with his sword here. I'm sorry, his shield here, his sword in his hand, kind of looking off in the distance. And he has his whole kingdom behind him. This is another one that the embellishments say something. We have a map up here in the corner, which gave me those emperor vibes, right? The conquest, his kingdom kind of represented here and what he is protecting, that nod to his process and what he has and what he is still after. And I can't help but think, nerdy reference, but I do think about certain things. I do think about certain characters when it comes to the tarot. And for this, the emperor, for whatever reason, makes me think of Ned Stark, even though he came to a terrible end. But it's that idea of being the whole package, right? Giving the sentence and having the honor and respect to face the consequences of those sentences, right? Like he talks about, Ned Stark talks about in the very first time that we see him interacting with his children in Game of Thrones, he has to behead someone. And he makes it a point to say, like, the reason I had to do it was because it was my sentence. I sentenced him to death, so I'm going to do this thing. And that's that whole package, that whole vibe, like being unafraid to step into this role and really embody it, that I just want to come across. And so that's why Jupiter was my main choice for this and in this form, right? So the Emperor. On to our last. Here we have Ye Old Hierophant. So you can see plainly the imagery very much corresponds here. So this image is of Saint Philip. This is again by Albert Dürer. Now, one thing I did add to this image was I created the threefold staff onto this image. I literally just took the single cross that he had and duplicated it down to create that same image. I also put some marks above his head to kind of represent that papal crown that's going on here. And speaking of all the textures that I added, here we have a book with writing on it, which made me think of the books of tradition, the knowledge, Bibles, Torahs, things of that nature. I wanted to represent that book knowledge, which he also holds in his hand. So, we also have Taurus down here at the bottom. But the book in his hands makes me think of, the books that priests hold, or the ones that we keep ourselves, our grimoires, our books of shadow, the occult books, and you know, throughout history. We keep our traditions and our rituals that have been passed down in these binders or by word of mouth, you know, but this was a physical representation of that. And it also reminds me of the rules and regulations, which I feel like the Hierophant really holds those things true and really kind of is that by the book figure. Someone who will also throw the book at you. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. He's a very double-edged sword for me as a card, as an image. It's a whole thing, right? And I feel like the Hierophant sometimes invokes those like really deep feelings for a lot of people. And while I wanted to capture that, I also wanted to give him a softer look, in a sense, where we have an older man who's got his beard, he's wise, he holds these things to be true, while still having the nod to the stiff religious vibe that is on the Hierophant and that kind of evokes those like big feelings for me. I wanted to see both. I wanted to be able to ignore this and see a teacher, right? A guru, you know, a wise person coming to help and coming to kind of refresh our memories of the traditions and rituals that we have and why they're in place, as well as bring that rigidity and that kind of oppression that sometimes organized religions can bring, at least for me. That's a personal thing for me. Again, I talked about his beard. I kind of wanted to have that like vibe where the student had become the teacher. He's learned these things. It's like that older version, right? This Hierophant is very baby-faced. So I wanted that, like, I've been through it. I know these things. I've done it in my life. Like, this was my life. And I really thought that that was a pretty powerful image as well. So the Hierophant is also, obviously, clad in red, which was definitely a huge nod to that. I didn't want to put him in anything else. And then we have some golds here. But that was about it. That was about the only things that I corresponded with the RWS here. So we have the Hierophant. So here's our start. The first 6 cards of Mystic Masters. Now, here's where you come in. You've seen these images. I told you a little bit about them, what I saw, what I corresponded here and there, what I brought to it, the stories that kind of went with it for me, what I was seeing and feeling and hearing. So what are your interpretations? Tell me what you see, what you feel, the things that you noticed in these images, what they mean to you. What made you think of something else or anything, everything? I am so curious to hear your added interpretations of the Mystic Masters, and I'm sure everyone else is as well. So be on the lookout for our next round of Mystic Masters, you guys. If you are looking for me to book a personal reading, my Etsy shop, my Instagram, 3 Fat Readers, all the other things, everything is going to be in the description below, and I hope to see you guys next time. I am sending all my love. Mwah! Later, Gators.